I wanted to say, the news this past week, that, beyond in the major talk was this SB 660, which
Sure.
purports a companion program to the Michigan medical marijuana. And I believe we have our special guest caller on the line. Is that you, Senator?
It is, yes. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for calling in to Planet Green Juice. I'm Michael Camoran. I'm a lawyer, and I'm here with some other activists and participants in the medical cannabis community. And you've really stood out as a hero to everyone. I think if there's one saving grace, we feel like there was someone fighting for the community side in the way that this whole thing happened. The moving so quickly from the committee to the Senate floor and moving along. And I think a lot of people really appreciate your speaking up as you did, and at least trying to have some contemplation in the big picture of things. Before we get into the specifics, I want to ask you, do you think that the initiative that was voted for in 2008, has it been implemented as well as it should have been?
Absolutely not. And I want to start by saying thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you on the show, and I thank you for the work that you're doing, raising awareness and educating people about what's going on, especially at our state capitol, because it really impacts us in so many ways that we don't necessarily see every day, but it's important to be engaged. And so I'm awfully glad that you're doing what you are doing. The 2008 law was very clear. The voters in Michigan said we should approve medical marijuana. We've got patients and patient advocates and people who really can benefit from medicinal marijuana, and it was a mandate. And unfortunately, there's a lot of politicians who didn't like the outcome of that and have gone out of their way to make the law murky as possible, and really have stood between patients and the medicine that can help them. And I think it's a travesty, and we owe it to the people to clear that up and to make sure that marijuana is accessible to people who need it the most.
It is kind of ironic, especially since there was a 2-year process in terms of the House and their investigative committee of the amendments to the law, and they passed them in the kind of lame duck session. But they had to go at it, and they did what they thought was best and fixed whatever they could and addressed whatever they could, and then seemingly they got to get something else going on. I kind of question that. But is it odd for you, from a senator, to see a bill move so quickly as it did from the committee to the floor? I know they say that it's like the Kuiper's bill from 2009. I don't really think that it is, but do you? What are your thoughts on that? Is that unusual for swift government like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think when you see a bill that is introduced and rushed through the system as quickly as this one was, or as quickly as Right to Work was in lame duck of last year, or recently, just even the last week, the Court of Claims bill that the governor has rushed through to hide all of the litigation that surrounds a lot of when people file suits against him. There's something up. There's an alternative motive there, and they're trying to avoid a lot of scrutiny. I think this could be one of those bills. The question is, why? This is a bill that is written for one out-of-state potential constituent in the event that marijuana is rescheduled at the federal level. I mean, it's a contingency bill that seeks to streamline for one potential corporate citizen and ignoring the need of patients in Michigan and the struggle that they are having under current law. And it's really a ridiculous use of taxpayer time and resources.
The Michigan is a caregiver system. I mean, there's been different views on whether or not the law, as it's written, would allow for dispensaries or not, or whether it was intended. I think some people have even said they didn't include dispensaries for a reason because of the political environment in the administration of the DEA at the time. But the trend, I think it's fair to say, is that there's a movement towards regulation. The federal government has now laid out some guidelines in terms of, if you're going to do it, this is what's going to have to pass our scrutiny test. And, Colorado comes out of the West as kind of like the shining state, I would think, in terms of, the least offensive to the federal government. in Michigan's kind of the opposite. I would say, it's much more. It's designed, I think, much more for an individualized, not centralized regulatory. Do you think that this system can work as it is, or do you think that there needs to be, some movement towards a more regulated system?
I absolutely believe that there needs to be movement toward a regulated system. I think there are a lot of people who think that, you see what's happening in our local communities, whether it's Ferndale or Lansing, you see what the voters are telling us is that it's time to decriminalize small amounts. And, I think ultimately we should really talk about making, regulating it and making sure it's safe, and perhaps even talking about taxing it. There are a lot of people who think that that's the route that we should go. I think this debate is long overdue, and it's time to engage in it in a real sense, in a very transparent way, and let the voters let the voters really tell us what they want, and for the legislature to not lead through scare tactics and not listen to, attorneys general with agendas. We should do what the voters want us to do.
Do you think do you think that an economy-based, marijuana, medical marijuana, or recreational type of industry is one that could potentially benefit the state? I mean, is that a direction? Is that a conversation that can take place?
I think it's a conversation that should take place, and it's one that, legislators should be eager to engage in. I certainly am. I think that when you see what the mood of the electorate is, you see what the realistic application would be, that this is an area that we need to have that debate. We need to move forward instead of being hamstrung by, old ideas and old notions of what marijuana means and what its potential could be. There's a lot of great things that could happen from us having this debate. I tell you, I sat there in that committee and I listened to one proponent of that bill, and we listened to patient advocate after patient advocate talk about how the system we have is not working. And as, a woman who 10 years ago cared for my mom as she died of brain cancer, I would have given anything for something that might have eased a day of pain in the end of her life, or helped stimulate her appetite to make her a little bit stronger to fight. This is a real concern for so many people in our state, and the legislature has turned a deaf ear to them, and so this conversation is long overdue, not just on medical marijuana, but on decriminalization overall.
One of the complaints, I think, or the reasons that Senator Jones, I saw a clip of him saying that the need for this bill was a reaction to the Dr. Mills and the wild home grows, or, over home grows. Do you see that as a real concern, as it exists right now, or do you think, or do you agree to a certain extent that there needs to be further, examination or scrutiny on those issues, either by more legislation or, some kind of, regulation of the home grows?
I think that there are a lot of issues surrounding the core concept of whether or not we're ready to decriminalize marijuana overall. Senator Jones, it comes from a law enforcement background, and so everything, every position he takes is colored by that experience, and I'll just leave it at that. I think in order to have a comprehensive change, whether it's just an attitude, but in legislation, in the law of our state, we owe it to the public to debate and listen and investigate every potential issue that would, could crop up if we moved in this direction. That's the right thing to do. That's how our system is supposed to work, and that's something I don't think any of us should shy away from. I think we would find in that it's not nearly the issue that Senator Jones makes it out to be, but certainly it's worth talking about, because I think it's better for all of us decision makers to have every bit of information and to listen to the public and to do it in a transparent way.
You mentioned the the fact there's that prevailing law enforcement view has not really changed much, since the law passed. That's what I was complaining about earlier, that there's been very little, if any, effort to try to bring those two communities together. I remember way back, Senator Durhal had some, like think tank kind of things. He was inviting people in from the community. I remember sitting at a table with someone from the ACLU and like the Michigan State Police and the guy from PAM, the prosecutor that gave a presentation, and it was just a great conversation. Like there was a discussion going on. Then the administration changed, and there wasn't any effort put into that. But I just feel like there's so much that we could get past. I feel like that's still one of the things that's missing for to even have the true and honest debate. I think that there's a real lack of trust in the two sides. Still, I think that it's partly driven by the executive branch's Attorney General and his policies, but I also think that there's also a lack of information. There's been nothing really invested into changing the way law enforcement thinks, like collectively, across the state.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think, if we could get everyone to start with an open mind and to say, I don't have all the information on all of the different angles here, and to go in, I think we could probably learn a lot from one another. Smart enough people at the legislature could figure out how to do this right and to move forward. You talk about law enforcement. I mean, you've got Senator Jones on one hand, and then I was just talking to a radio station out of Kalamazoo, and they said that their sheriff, or maybe it was the city police officer, I'm not sure, but I know that there was a law enforcement officer of a high rank that really took a proactive effort in lessening the penalties on marijuana possession in Kalamazoo. These are the type of people that we need to have at the table, because there is a practical issue that law enforcement deals with when they've got to spend time on what the public generally, is more often than not saying are kind of petty crimes to be investigating, when they've got much bigger issues that they are facing as law enforcement. And we know our prisons are packed and how much it costs to house a prisoner every year. I think we could learn a lot, and I think we would find, if we had that true and honest dialogue, that not everyone in law enforcement sees it the same way that Senator Jones does.
I would agree with that, but there's a certain party line. You could say it's its own entity, and I'm not. I hear from police officers every day in a conference room. I think it should be legalized in Texas. I mean, it comes out of officers' mouths over and over again. But and that's really, I guess, the point. City after city in Michigan has been voting for some kind of reform. Less criminal, more non-criminal. The trends nationally across the country are changing. It's for legalization and medicals, like at the 60-70% mark. And there just seems to be a few of these limited institutions within our system who seemingly retain a tremendous amount of authority, that are making these dire decisions and not really contemplating some of the truths that are before them. Is there any realization of that, or are they just going about this blindly?
Well, I think, we have seen our last Attorney General and the current Attorney General score a lot of political points with their stance on marijuana, medical marijuana, but marijuana generally. And I think so long as they're able to score those political points, it's really going to scare legislators who maybe see the value of having this type of debate from getting into it. I think that's unfortunate, but I have to imagine at some point they are going to really get a grasp of where the public is on this issue and have to rethink how much they're going to politicize this and try to score those points. I think it's times are changing, and whether it is on same-sex marriage or it's on decriminalization of marijuana, I think that it's a matter of time. But we do have a lot of current office holders who are digging their heels in and trying to keep things the way that they are. And I don't like the fact that it takes time, but I do think that it is a matter of time before we are successful.
I want to just back to that. We didn't really talk about it, but the 660 bill. I remember we had the mayor from Berkeley on our radio show many years ago. It was just when dispensary talk was just kind of happening, and I remember saying something like, that she really didn't. She knew nothing about medical marijuana. She never tried marijuana before. She'd never, never really had a concept of where it came from, and she kept talking about if she was going to, she would want to buy it like she buys all of her other goods. Want to go to a store. There's a label on it. There's some kind of, something of accountability that goes along with it when you get it, and it kind of suggested that there's all these other people out there that may want to try medical marijuana. They just, want to know that it didn't come from someone's basement, which the community is fine with. They've been that's how it's been going forever, pretty much. And this bill, I don't know if this bill does that, but do you think that this is going to appeal to a group of people? Forget the medical marijuana, the existing community. Is this going to create a if it was happening, do you think you'd see a large number of people entering into a program like this because it's as it is?
It may give some people solace thinking that pharmaceutical grade means that it's better quality. I think when you talk to the advocates, you learn that it's not necessarily the case. And the interesting thing is if the fear is that once you create this, that then they ban people from growing it on their own. The assurances were, no, we won't do that. However, in Canada, they do not have that ability, and that's where this model comes from. So I think that there is a reason for the concern, a legitimate reason. In addition, a lot of the people that really can make the most, that can make use out of this medicinally are people who are in hospice or who are in hospitals or children. And when this pharmaceutical grade is only the smokable kind. And so those groups are precluded from making use of the pharmaceutical grade because you can't smoke in a hospital or hospice, and children certainly can't. So there are a lot of concerns with Senate Bill 660 moving forward, and I think not unfounded concerns.
I think that, I've noticed that the evolution of the caregiver system as it is right now in terms of the various types of products, the different types of methods of ingestion that come out are moving at like light speed, and that's been the worst part about it, that they've really been held back by the limitations of the law enforcement community in not having specific definitions about medibles or candies or other ways that people are going to ingest things that are more medicinal, because they're not moving. They're stuck. Not accepting it. I think that's been a tremendous disservice as well. Do you think these two bills can work side by side, or do you think there's I'd say 2 million people that are the LARA promotes some statistic of 27% of Michigan households have sought treatment for chronic pain in 2012. But 1.82 million people probably, so you have that many people that are, presumptively using opiates or some kind of medications to treat chronic pain. You've got that whole group of people that are potential to these programs. Do you see that? Do you think they would, work equally beside one another, or do you think it's really one or the other?
Oh no, I mean there's potential for them to work side by side. Obviously there are a whole lot of contingencies here of whether or not, X happens, then Y, but I do think that there's potential. I also think that the concern that one will obviate the need or the existence of the other is real. So clearly I think we can move forward on two tracks, but we've not solved the problem that current residents are facing with regard to all the ambiguity and the red tape. And so we owe it to the people who currently reside here that we represent to solve the problem for them before we streamline things for an out-of-state corporation on a contingency.
And that's the thing, the contingency seems to be, I don't know, is there secrets being passed around? Does somebody know something that nobody else knows? The way that they kind of it kind of feels that way. Like, how could they even go as far as to, do all this hoopla, unless there's because it's really not, it's not specific. The language doesn't have to be scheduled, or was it by permission or by, what's the language of the
federal authority?
Yeah, like if they give the authority to do so. So, have they run this past the U.S. Attorney's Office and said, look, if we have this kind of program, and can this work? I mean, it almost sounds that way, but
Paracon's got a hotline right to the DOJ.
Right. Well, the sponsor of the bill, that was a question that I asked in our committee. What how can you sit here and tell us that you think it's very likely that marijuana is going to all of a sudden get changed to be considered a Schedule II drug in our country? And they said, well, we've got it on good information, wink and nod. And it was laughable because they also question about who has the authority to do that, whether or not it's the Attorney General, Eric Holder, or if it's Congress, and which I just thought was really silly, because you wouldn't want to rely on an Attorney General, his personal classification. I mean, Eric Holder's decided not to prosecute, but that doesn't mean that marijuana, the schedule, has been changed. And, you can, and that can change with the next Attorney General. They can decide to prosecute. So why on earth would we go forward with a law based on something that may or may not happen, that is completely outside of our control, on some sort of a vague assurance that they've got it on good information it may happen? It's silly.
My theory was that it was one of the greatest political moves of all time, right? Whoever thought they were raising money from the medical cannabis community, forget it. This is a program that's like deep pockets, and you don't even have to produce, right? It's like if and but if maybe, and then you've got this, major company that's dumping money into it and flying people around. I understand.
Political junkets to Saskatoon.
Yeah. So what can one do? I mean, is there a program for the activists that we can pass along here for, remaining involved? I know you like our being engaged. I think I agree with you 100%. It's critical. People need to get involved in this. They are the, who the government is supposed to be accountable to. But anything else that comes to mind in terms of this issue, or
I think, I mean, it was powerful sitting there and listening to patient advocates and patients. I think that legislators don't often look their constituents in the eye, and I know that there are patients and patient advocates in every one of our 38 Senate districts, hundreds, thousands of them, and it's a powerful voice, but only if they use it, and only if they really put the pressure on not just their senator, because now the bill is over in the House of Representatives, but focusing on the House of Representatives. I'm told that Representative Colton's bill will be coming up for a hearing in the next few weeks after the legislative Thanksgiving break, and there's an opportunity to see some some productive legislation move forward and let communities zone for dispensaries. So that would be great, and that's a part of what I was trying to do on the floor yesterday, is raise awareness, put the pressure on them to do something, and maybe we can see that moving. But we need the advocates to let their voices be heard.
I agree with that, and we do. Again, that was a highlight because it was someone at least fighting back. I think that's one of the things that I find that as a lawyer, a lot of times they're getting thrown around in situations they're not expecting to necessarily, and they want to see that their laws being fought for. I think what is. I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate your time. I want to ask you one final question. Though, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm probably biased in the sense that of the medical marijuana calls, in addition to giving advice of how to be in compliance. I get the calls where people are alleged to have not been in compliance and they've got to call a lawyer now. And I'm just curious, from the legislative, what you're hearing from the voice from the community, is this a voice that you're hearing? And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm saying that when I get to court, the courts are not enforcing the law. They're not. There's still things that are up in the air. There's a lot of unresolved issues still that are not. In this new area, they won't traditionally rule for the defendant. They'll say rule for the people, and then it's up to the defendant to appeal, which also isn't fair because of the resources issue. But what is the word, or if there is any, about like how the courts are dealing with these cases that are not clearly obviously out of compliance? I'm talking the ones that they don't have a locked door, in their basement, and or 13 plants, or whatever. Some of the cut plants that are hanging and not dry, that they count as weight when it's not usable, and things like that. What is the how are things heard about the issue in Lansing?
I don't know that we legislators have a real handle on that, to be very honest with you. My fear is that because there's such ambiguity in the law and so much gray area, that that there are different standards for different people. And I have to tell you, as the parent of a fifth grader who has recently studied the rule of law, and that no one's above the law and it applies equally to everyone regardless of your station in life, I do fear that with the ambiguity that the legislature and the Attorney General's office more than anyone has created, that we don't know what's happening in our individual courts, and we've left it so unclear. So it'd be very difficult as a judge, I think, and I worry that there are different standards being applied. So I think that's an example of why it's so critical that we get our arms around this and we do it right. We don't just jam something through based on one person's assumptions of what may or may not happen, that we actually have the debate, we do it in an open manner, and we let the public weigh in. That's how it's supposed to work.
I agree. And in terms of your the lesson that your child was talking about, I had a police officer on a witness stand the other day who had arrested my client, who was a passenger and a patient, and had his marijuana in the back. And I asked him, have you had any training about the Michigan medical marijuana? He said, no. I go, have you ever read the act? He said, no. And like as if it didn't matter. And I found that just the exact thing. Like, I'm going to have fun in front of the jury about, ignorance of the law is no excuse, ladies and gentlemen. But I just found it just fascinating. I think that's one of the core there. That it's all in that. It's all that political mambo jambo and that one branch of leadership that is not doing the service to the true majority on this issue. But all right, listen, thank you for putting up with all of my questions, and I really enjoyed talking to you, and you have been very, very inspirational to many, and thank you for the fight that you're putting up against this crazy times. Thank you.
It's awfully generous of you, and I appreciate it a great deal. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Wow, that was Michigan Senate Minority Leader Gretchen Whitmer from East Lansing, and
let me just say, all of the videos of the testimony that were described in the on the Senate floor, where Senator Whitmer defended patients and offered amendments to SB 660, they're all available on YouTube. I've created an article on the Compassion Chronicle, so you can actually watch her do what we just praised her for doing if you weren't able to participate in it to begin with. Outstanding. She did a great job in representing our community.
I remember she was in some other fisticuffs about some issues about during the lame duck session, just, because of the nastiness by which the system was being played. I have to say that I remember appreciating her then, too, on the...
Also the immediate effect issue, too, that has plagued the legislature. She was one of the key Dems that tried to fight that.
That's right. All right, so listen, we're going to take a quick break. I really enjoyed that. It was fantastic. I'm going to have to listen to that again. All right, we're going to be right back and listen to Planet Creatures. I see that there's some callers on it. We're going to get to the Human Solution Representative, and I want to hear what everyone thought about the Senator tonight. So we were going to take calls. Please bring it in. 347-326-9626. We've got about 56 minutes left. We'll be right back.